I didn't expect my mother's call to ruin my day, but that's exactly what he did. I am Gina Parisi, 30, 8 years old, head of marketing at a prestigious international company, a woman who has learned to be strong not out of compulsion, but out of necessity, especially after exactly 1 year ago, in a series of gloomy autumn days, I finally put an end to my marriage with Diego, leaving behind all those years that turned into fatigue, compromises, and the feeling that I was constantly squeezing myself into a shape that I hadn't been able to fit into for a long time. Since then, I felt that life, like a road cleared after a hurricane, began to take shape again, where there were only my desires, my goals, and my decisions. The apartment for which I had been paying the mortgage for many years was now completely mine, cozy, filled with light and a reflection of my character, from the soft green plaid on the armchair to the carefully selected books on the shelves. My career was going uphill. I was confidently leading the team to new results, and for the first time in a long time I felt that everything was in my hands. It was at this moment, when I was reading the quarterly forecasts, analyzing how to allocate the marketing budget for the next month, the phone rang, and the screen, like a harbinger of trouble, flashed the name Mom. The smile on my lips was sincere, albeit short-lived. I expected to hear a familiar grumble about the weather or another complaint about the neighbors, but everything turned out to be much less harmless. "Gina, your father and I will have our 40th anniversary in 3 weeks," she said without the slightest introduction, her voice sounding like she was announcing the results of a school competition, and not a family event that was supposed to be a cause for joy. "We're going to celebrate at home because your Aunt Camille hates restaurants. We've already decided that you're going to treat us," she continued with that straightforward confidence that always baffled me and left me speechless. I sighed heavily, leaning back in my office chair, feeling a wave of irritation mixed with impotence rising from within. The last time they chose something, it was a vacation to Hawaii for Christmas, which cost me more than $5,000. At the time, I justified it by saying that they deserved the luxury, yet they really supported me when I was in college. But now, "What is it this time, Mom?" I asked, rubbing my temple, sensing something was wrong. "A country house," she said, almost casually, as if she'd asked me to buy a box of chocolates at the store on my way home. "I'm sorry, I thought I didn't hear you," I replied, feeling a lump rise in my throat. "A country house," she repeated with exaggerated calm. "My father and I, Samuel and his wife, Alice, and her family thought you should buy it. You make good money, you're single, you've already paid for your apartment, you can do it. We all need a home where we can gather. Samuel and his children, Alice and her husband, and my younger brothers and sisters will be a family place." I didn't immediately find what to say. My head was buzzing as if a swarm of wasps had exploded in an instant, and I couldn't catch a single coherent thought, except for a dull surprise. How could it be so easy, without discussion, without prior conversation, to impose such an expense on me, as if it were something self-evident? "Mom," I began to speak, choosing my words, trying not to fall into a scream, "this is a huge expense. I can't just buy a house." "Well, we've already looked at a few options," she interrupted without batting an eye. "One particularly good one is just an hour away from the city." I clenched my teeth to keep from cursing out loud. "We need to talk about this in person," I said stiffly, trying to keep some clarity in my voice. "I'll be there tomorrow night." "There's nothing to discuss, Gina," she said coldly, and her voice turned icy. "But if you want to talk, okay, come by 6. And before I could answer, the phone went silent. I stared at the phone screen for a few more seconds, as if hoping that she would come to her senses and call back, but he was silent, and there was more thunder in that silence than in the fiercest accusations. My hands were shaking, anger mixed with confusion swirled in my chest, and the whole day after that passed in a fog for me. My thoughts kept returning to the conversation, to this insolence, to the absurd certainty that I owed it. All my life I've tried to be generous, to be someone I can rely on. Every month, I sent my parents $1,000 for utility bills. I paid for a private kindergarten for Alice's children, covered the cost of expensive medicines for Samuel's son, and helped prepare their car. And maybe at some point I just taught them that my support is the norm, not an act of goodwill. The next day was no easier. The lines I wanted to say were spinning in my head. I was rehearsing my speech, hoping that when the moment came, I would be able to explain that it was crazy to buy a house. I left work early, my stomach clenched with anxiety as I drove to my parents' house, and the closer the denouement got, the more clearly I realized that this was not just a conversation. This is a test. When I arrived, the first thing that caught my eye was that Samuel and Alice's cars were already parked at the gate. I wasn't expecting an ambush. Mom opened the door, and her smile was strained, like a thin rope stretched to its limit. Dad sat in his chair and only nodded briefly, without getting up, without saying a word. Samuel and Alice were already sitting on the couch, and they were both looking at me. "Hello everyone," I said, trying to sound casual, but my voice traitorously trembled, reflecting the tension that was spreading inside me in waves as soon as I crossed the threshold of my parents' house. I noticed that they hadn't left me a place at the dining table, even though there were still crumbs on the tablecloth, and the smell of warmed pasta and garlic bread was in the air, as if to remind me that the meal had just ended, and no one had bothered to put on an extra set. With an effort, I swallowed the emerging feeling of detachment and inappropriateness that gripped me every time I came to this house, which was increasingly alien, although once every wall of it knew my touch, voice, and the smells of my childhood. Thinking that maybe we could still talk calmly, without accusations and manipulations, I took a deep breath and said, "I think we could discuss the issue of an anniversary gift." My mother, without changing her expression, motioned for me to sit in the chair opposite my father, who, as before, did not even try to hide his detachment and silent disapproval, firmly entrenched on his face. No one offered me anything to drink or asked me how my day had been, as if my presence was not the beginning of a dialogue, but a mandatory formality that should just happen. I sat down, feeling the usual tension building in my back, and began to speak, choosing my words carefully so as not to let my emotions break through. I thought I could contribute $25,000 if Samuel and Alice would add the amount they can afford without compromising their family budgets. Then we could buy you both a new car, decent and reliable, instead of your old Camry, which has been asking for retirement for a long time. The silence that followed was deafening. It was as if the air in the room had suddenly disappeared. Samuel and Alice exchanged glances, and there was everything in that exchange of glances: annoyance, misunderstanding, feigned amazement, and, most importantly, absolute self-righteousness. "We can't contribute large amounts," Samuel finally said, adjusting the cuff of his sweater. "We have families, children, unlike you." Alice nodded, adding with an almost pitiful expression, "We have already contributed to our gift, and we all agreed that you will buy a country house. You're going to use it too," she added with a slight smile, as if that simplified everything, as if the offer wasn't a lifelong burden but a tempting bonus. "You could come over on weekends, that would be great." I looked at them with a growing sense of detachment, as if there was an invisible crack between me and them, growing with every phrase. "I don't have money for a country house," I said slowly, trying to stay calm despite the throbbing anger building in my chest. Mom immediately intervened. Her voice sounded with the same tone that I've known since childhood as out of the question. "You could take out a mortgage," she said, as if it were the most reasonable and obvious thing in the world. "With your salary, you could easily apply." I felt like I was falling into some kind of strange dream, where everything was painfully familiar, but distorted beyond recognition. If my family has always been like this, if this situation was no exception, but only part of a long chain that I had previously refused to see, then everything took on an alarming logic. This conversation made no sense, it didn't lead anywhere, and realizing this, I stood up. "I'll decide which gift I'll give," I said firmly, looking everyone in the face. "I have to go." No one tried to stop me as I headed for the door. Not a single glance betrayed a desire to talk, to explain, to reconcile. As I was holding the pen, I heard my mother's voice behind me, sharp as a blow to a nerve. "You're going to regret this, Gina." I didn't turn around. The road home was a blur, not from the rain, but from anger and tears, which I held back by clenching my teeth to prevent them from breaking through. When I finally got to my apartment, I was shaking with anger. After making myself a strong mint tea, I sat on the balcony and stared at the dark sky, trying to calm down, trying to figure out exactly what had happened. What happened to my family? When did I become not a person for them, but something in between an ATM and insurance in case of another whim? The more I thought about it, the clearer I realized, this is not news, not a sudden fall. I've been financing their lifestyle for years, not noticing how the habit of giving has become their right to demand. And now that I refused, I was being selfish. The weeks after that disastrous family gathering passed in complete silence. No calls from Mom, no messages from Dad, not even the usual requests for money from Samuel or Alice. At first, this silence was a relief, as if the air had become cleaner and it was finally possible to breathe. But then she started to scare. Never in my adult life have I been left so long without at least one treatment, even if it was just GINA. We have a problem. They probably just give you space, my friend Zita said at lunch, looking at me over her glass of white wine. Or maybe they realized how unreasonable their actions were. You don't know my family, I replied, picking up some salad with a fork. It's the calm before the storm. As my parents' wedding anniversary approached, I decided that I would give them a generous gift anyway. It wasn't a country house, of course, but the check for $15,000 seemed fair and quite decent to me. They could spend it however they wanted, on repairs, on vacations, even on a down payment if they really decided to seriously start buying a house. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that I was doing the right thing. The only unreasonable thing was that I hadn't received an invitation to the anniversary celebration. No text message, no call, not even a postcard. I knew when and where it would be, at 6 p.m, at their house, on the 18th. They talked about it beforehand, and I assumed that I should still be there. Invitations or not. 2 days before the date, the phone rang. It was Aunt Beatrice, my father's cousin. We always got along well, even though we didn't talk much. "Gina, are you free for coffee today?" "What is it?" she asked, and her voice sounded with a kind of quiet anxiety. "I need to talk to you about something." "How about Café Luna at 3? I came to the cafe early, ordered a cappuccino and sat by the window, watching the passers-by while I waited. Beatrice came in a few minutes after I settled down by the window. Her face, usually calm and a little distracted, now expressed not just anxiety, but some kind of dense, restrained heaviness, as if she was carrying on her shoulders someone else's secret, from which she herself suffered no less. When she sat down across from the waitress, not waiting for her, not interested in the menu, the atmosphere of the cafe, or even whether it was comfortable for both of us, she immediately began to speak. Her voice was quiet, but there was a determination in it that was rare for her. "I was at your parents' house yesterday," she said without preamble, and I became alert, feeling some thin strings tighten inside me, and I overheard something that I think you should know. Something unpleasant clenched in my stomach, as if anticipating in advance what would follow these words. Beatrice leaned forward, approaching, and said in a low voice, "They're planning to humiliate you on the anniversary, Gina. They moved the celebration time by 2 hours, to 4 p.m. instead of 6. And they didn't tell you about it on purpose, so that you'd be late, so that you'd arrive at a locked door, alone, dressed up, and not understanding why you weren't needed." I stared at her, unable to comprehend the depth of what was said. My cappuccino remained untouched, floating in the cup like a mirage that has nothing to do with what is happening. "You can't be serious," I whispered, but I could see in Beatrice's eyes that I already believed, even though I didn't want to admit it. "I really wish I wasn't serious," she replied softly, "but your mother talked about it with such pride, as if she had come up with a brilliant revenge." And Samuel and Alice agreed, they even laughed. "I told your father that it was mean, that I couldn't keep quiet, but he just shrugged and said that you deserved it for your selfishness." I decided not to go. I can't support this behavior. I took her hand, and there was more gratitude in that touch than I could put into words. "Thank you for telling me," I said, almost in a whisper. My thoughts were racing, changing every second, like leaves in a gust of autumn wind, but I knew it was the moment of truth. "What are you going to do?" Beatrice asked, looking at me with concern. I didn't know at the time, but by the time I got home, I already had a clear and precise understanding. The next day, I said I wasn't feeling well and took the day off. I needed time to prepare a response to my family's ridiculous, childish, and at the same time frighteningly malicious scheme. The first thing I did was log into my banking app and canceled all the regular transfers I had been making to my parents, $1,000 a month, like clockwork, for many years. I took a screenshot of the cancellation and printed it out. Then, sitting at the kitchen table, I opened my laptop and began to compile a table of all the benefits that I generously but silently bestowed on my family. Over the past 5 years, monthly transfers, a trip to Hawaii, repairs to Samuel's car, expenses for a private kindergarten for Alice's children, bills for emergency medical care, which I paid without question. The total amount that came out at the end amazed even me, $63,427. I printed this out too. Then I found a beautiful gift box in the closet, left over from last Christmas, silver, thick, with wide sides. I lined it with tissue paper, put the printouts in there, and put a handwritten note on top. "Dear family," I began, "I was planning to give you $15,000 for your anniversary. Instead, I have decided to completely end your financial support. The attached documents show that I have already given you more than $60,000 in recent years, an amount that I consider more than sufficient. From this day on, I will no longer finance your lifestyle. Moreover, I will no longer be a part of your life at all. This is my gift to myself. Goodbye. GINA." I carefully folded the note, put it on top of the printouts, closed the box, wrapped it in elegant silver paper and tied it with a blue ribbon. It turned out exquisitely and at the same time absolutely accurate, in fact, the perfect Trojan horse hiding the truth instead of false smiles. On the day of the anniversary, I drove up to my parents' house at 15:45, exactly as Beatrice had warned. The driveway was filled with cars lined up along the street. The party was clearly in full swing. I parked a little way away, turned on the music, took a deep breath and sat in the car for 15 minutes, gathering my courage, tuning into what was coming. At 6 o'clock in the evening, I went to the front door. There, of course, was a handwritten sign, "Welcome to our 40th anniversary. Everyone is welcome, except GINA." Despite the fact that I was expecting it, that I was preparing for it, the tablet struck me much more than I expected, not because of the words themselves, but because of who wrote them. These were people who had to love me unconditionally, regardless of whether I was buying them a house or not. Instead, they chose a childish, cool trick to publicly exclude me from my family, from life, and from the holiday. I didn't knock. I didn't try to enter. I just put my elegant note box on the welcome mat, pressed the doorbell, and left. When I was almost at the car, I heard the door open behind me. But I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see who exactly saw my gift. I left, overcome by a strange mixture of bitterness, liberation, and silence, in which there were finally no lies. By the time I got home, my phone was bursting with notifications, and looking at the screen, I couldn't help but feel that same feeling of disappointment stirring in me again, mixed with amazement, as if even now, after everything that had happened, after the telltale sign on the door, my carefully packed box with a farewell note and a silent departure, they still did not understand, did not recognize borders, did not respect my decision. 6 missed calls from Mom, 4 from Dad, and messages from Samuel and Alice continued to arrive with amazing chronological speed, as if my phone had suddenly become a hotline of madness. "It was just a joke, come back," Mom wrote, as if the mockery, planned in advance, could be attributed to humor. "We need to talk about this," added Dad, whose voice I could already hear through the memories, indifferent, tired, accusing. Samuel didn't stay away either, "You're overreacting." And Alice added her own, "Mom says they need money for dental services next month." I read each message with growing disbelief, and even now, when they had the opportunity, albeit poisoned by reproaches, to rethink everything, even in this situation, when logic and common sense screamed about boundaries and personal responsibility, my family continued to ask for money, as if nothing had happened, as if I should, must. It is intended for only one thing: to be their financial donor. I didn't answer. I just blocked all their numbers, one by one, with a barely perceptible sense of relief, as if I were cutting the rope step by step that kept me in that old, stuffy system in which my desires had no meaning. After that, I poured myself a glass of red wine, went to the balcony and, wrapped in a soft blanket, for the first time in many years allowed myself to just watch the sunset, not thinking about who needs to pay for gas, whose car to fix, which school to send a check to, or which of the relatives needs a new phone. I felt like the burden that had been on my shoulders for years was beginning to ease, slowly, not without pain, but inevitably, and there was something liberating about the process. I stopped being their personal bank. I stopped putting their needs above my own. I have finally ended this long-term drama of constant self-denial. On the morning after the anniversary, when I woke up in my apartment, flooded with the soft light of the early morning, I felt a strange and unusual sense of calm, as if everything inside had come to balance. I expected guilt, regrets, maybe even tears, but instead I felt only lightness, the same that I had read about in books before, but had never experienced for myself. I knew my family wouldn't give up so easily. I knew they would try to find a way to get to me, to try to bring me back into the orbit of their financial dependence. So I started with the preparation. I called the concierge of my building. "Good morning, Miguel. This is GINA," I said, trying to sound calm. "I need to update the visitor policy. My parents, brother, and sister should no longer be allowed in the building under any circumstances. Their names are Richard and Linda Parisi, Samuel Parisi, and Alice Fabry." "Of course, Miss Parisi," Miguel replied. "I'll make a note in the system and inform the other concierges." Then I called the security service of my office and explained the situation, repeating the names, emphasizing that they might try to get inside without permission. After that, I wrote a short but honest letter to my boss. I explained that some members of my family might try to interfere with work, and asked for basic precautions. Sandra, as always, was understanding. Her answer came immediately: "The guards will figure it out. Let me know if you need anything else." By lunchtime that day, I had blocked my family from all social media platforms and changed my email settings so that messages from their addresses were automatically deleted. It seemed like an extreme move, almost cruel, but I knew from experience how persistent they could be when it came to money. And I was not mistaken. That evening, my phone rang. It was Miguel. "Miss Parisi," he said apologetically, "your parents are here. They stand at the entrance and insist that they need to talk to you." I told them about the restriction, but they made a real scene. I sighed. "Tell them that if they don't leave, you will call the police." 2 days later, Samuel tried to break into my office building. The security worked flawlessly, and he couldn't get past the lobby. A day later, Alice showed up at my favorite coffee shop, the one I visited almost every evening. She must have been watching me. I noticed her before she noticed me, and without waiting for a meeting, I immediately left the institution. My heart was pounding somewhere in my throat, but there was no fear inside, only fatigue and conviction in the correctness of my actions. "They're relentless," I told Zita on the phone that evening, lying on the couch with a cup of chamomile tea. "They really think that if they keep pushing, I will break down and start supporting them again." "That's probably what they think," Zita replied calmly. "You've always given up before." And she was right. For years in a row, when my family began their pressure, their persuasions, reproaches, tears, I eventually gave in, put up with it. But now it was different. The sign on the door became that very feature, concrete, indisputable proof that they no longer saw me as a person, only a resource, only a source, only a convenient wallet linked to their needs. A week after the anniversary, Aunt Beatrice called. Her voice was still soft, but this time there was more anxiety in it. "I thought you should know what's going on," she said. "Your mother is furious. She tells everyone that you abandoned your family, that you betrayed them. But some of us started to notice that she and your father started making some adjustments." "What kind of adjustments?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, although I could tell from the tone of Beatrice's voice that her words had hurt me more deeply than I wanted to show. "Your mother," she replied, leaning forward slightly, as if she was afraid that someone might eavesdrop on us even through the phone, "got a part-time job in the accessories department at the mall for the first time in many years." I raised my eyebrows, at first not even believing what I was hearing, because my mother always disparaged working in stores, believing that her status in the family exempted her from such inappropriate activities. She worked for 2 decades and suddenly returned, because for the first time she felt what it meant to lack the usual financial foundation that I had served for so many years. "And your father," Beatrice continued, "sold his membership in the golf club." I felt a pang of satisfaction, not schadenfreude, no, but rather quiet inner justice. They were finally faced with a reality in which they needed to make choices and take responsibility for their decisions, instead of habitually pulling everything out of me, as if from an inexhaustible source. "Samuel and Alice are also struggling," she added, not hiding her irony. "It looks like you helped them with a lot more than they admitted to the rest of their relatives. Now that the help is gone, they say you should have bought them a country house." Beatrice laughed, a short, tired, indignant laugh. "No, now they have abandoned this particular requirement. Now they're just saying that you left them for no reason." "Of course they do," I muttered, feeling something inside shrink with resentment again, even though I knew that this was how it would be. "As important as it was," she continued, "I told everyone who was willing to listen what really happened. Most people think they've crossed the line." "Thank you, Beatrice. You're the only one in the whole family I still want to talk to," I said with sincere warmth, because her support, even if modest and cautious, was a huge anchor for me in this boundless sea of betrayal. After that call, my relatives started getting in touch one by one. My cousin Umberto, who rarely mentioned my existence, Uncle Ernesto with his ever-instructive tone, even my grandmother, whose lavender-scented hands had once comforted me as a child. All with the same message: "Your parents miss you, can't you fix everything?" I gave each of them the same answer: "When they sincerely apologize and stop expecting me to finance their lifestyle, we can talk about restoring our relationship." Neither of them called back. And as the weeks turned into months, attempts to contact me became less frequent, as if even the most persistent part of my family was finally beginning to realize that this time I was really serious, that my boundaries were not an illusion, but a solid shield. Meanwhile, something unexpected was happening. I began to discover who I am without the constant drain of energy and resources, without the eternal need to solve other people's problems. With the money I could save now, I booked a 2-week vacation in Portugal, a country I had always dreamed of going to, but never prioritized, because I turned every vacation into a resource for family needs. I signed up for pottery classes on Wednesday nights, something that had attracted me for years, but which I never had enough time or inner permission for. And most importantly, I started dating again. After my divorce from Diego, I convinced myself that it was better to be alone, that I was calmer, that I was more efficient. The truth was, I was too busy taking care of my family to put anything into a romantic life. I met Alex at a pottery class. He was, to put it mildly, clumsy at modeling. His first attempt looked more like a deflated soccer ball than a bowl, and he laughed at it himself, which immediately won me over. After class, he came up to me and asked if I wanted to have a coffee. "I have to warn you," he said as we sat down at a table in a small cafe nearby, "I'm not just bad at pottery, I'm actually bad at most artistic endeavors. But I keep trying new things anyway." I smiled, surprised at how easily he talked about his weaknesses. "I admire that," I replied. "I've spent too many years not trying anything new." Our coffee date turned smoothly into dinner. Dinner turned into walks around the city, and then into short hikes on weekends. We began to see each other regularly. Alex was different from all the men I've ever dated, thoughtful, independent, completely non-demanding. He wanted nothing from me except my time and attention, and it turned out to be so rare, so liberating. One evening, about 3 months after I finally severed ties with my family, Alex and I were cooking dinner in my kitchen, his shirt stained with sauce, and I was still laughing at his attempt to peel an avocado with a butter knife when my phone rang. An unfamiliar number appeared on the screen, and I pressed accept without hesitation. "Hi, Gina, it's Mom," came a voice that almost made my phone slip out of my hands. She must have called from a friend's number or a rented line to bypass my lockdowns. "I have nothing to tell you," I said coldly, already preparing to press end the call. "Wait," she screamed, her voice shaking. "Please, just listen. We're fighting, Gina. The utilities are overdue, and your father's prescription costs have increased. We need your help." I closed my eyes, feeling for a moment the familiar and treacherously tenacious feeling of guilt, the one that always surfaced in my chest whenever it came to family, duty, help, endless sacrifice of oneself for the sake of someone else's comfort. I almost trembled, almost allowed my mother's voice to penetrate my armor again, to shake that new, barely acquired stability, but then I took a deep breath and said with restraint, although everything inside was bubbling, "Mom, I've been helping you for years. I transferred money, I paid for vacations, cars, medical treatment, and education for the children of your loved ones. And you? You repaid me by demanding that I buy you a house, and then you tried to publicly humiliate me when I refused. I've had enough." "But we're a family," she insisted, and her voice cracked, as if she were really suffering, as if everything that had happened was not part of their plan, but some kind of ridiculous misunderstanding. "Yes, family helps family," I agreed, feeling my voice grow firmer. "But it works both ways. Goodbye, Mom." I hung up the phone and, without hesitation, blocked the new number she was calling from. Alex looked at me questioningly, with a slight concern in his eyes, but he didn't push, didn't rush, just asked quietly, "Is everything okay?" I took a deep breath, feeling the tension drain from my body. "It will be," I replied. That was my mom. We drifted apart. "Do you want to talk about it?" I was surprised at myself, but I nodded. "Actually, yes, I think I do." That evening, we sat next to each other on the couch, and I told Alex everything. About the country house they had demanded, about the trap with the altar time of the anniversary, about the years of financial sacrifices I had made without gratitude, without reciprocation, about that invisible but suffocating thread that connected me to their expectations. He listened without interrupting, only nodding from time to time, and his face changed from disbelief, through shock to outright sympathy. "I've never heard anything like it," he said when I finished. "Did they really expect you to buy them a house?" "And I'll take out a mortgage to do it," I added, shaking my head, and there was less pain in my voice than before, more surprise, like a person who has just finally seen the boundaries of the maze in which he has been wandering for years. Looking back, I realized that they used me for many years. And I was so absorbed in being a good daughter that I didn't even notice. "And if they keep trying to contact you?" I sighed, leaning back on the couch, staring at the ceiling as if the answers might be written there. "I will continue to block them. I don't think I'm ready to let them back into my life. Maybe I never will." The next few weeks were a test of my resolve. Mom kept calling from different unknown numbers. I blocked each one before I even heard half of it. Dad, who was not particularly resourceful, sent me a letter to the office. I gave it back to the administrator without even opening it. One evening, while I was doing pottery, I noticed Samuel standing at the window, looking through the glass, and apparently he tracked me down. I didn't wait for him to come in, just took off my apron and went out the back door. My heart was thudding, but fear was quickly giving way to tired determination. Each such attempt only strengthened my confidence that I had done the right thing. "You seem different," Sandra remarked at the monthly review meeting. "More focused, more confident. Whatever changes you make in your personal life, they work." The management sees it. I just made some difficult but long overdue decisions, I replied with a slight smile. Boundaries that should have been set many years ago. Well, keep it up, Sandra said, nodding approvingly. We're just considering you for a promotion. 6 months after the complete breakup with my family, I took Alex with me to Portugal, a country that had long remained a dream, postponed for the sake of other people's needs. We spent 2 magnificent weeks exploring the ancient streets of Lisbon, relaxing on the sandy beaches of the Algarve, enjoying the freshest seafood in the fishing villages. I never checked my work email, didn't think about the problems, didn't wonder what kind of family disaster I would have to solve. I was completely involved in the moment, and when one evening we were walking on a warm beach under the starry sky, the wind playing in my hair, and we had glasses of wine in our hands, I suddenly realized that I was happy. Not temporarily satisfied, not satisfied for a moment, but deeply, calmly and fundamentally happy, in a way I probably haven't been since childhood. I freed myself from the toxic dynamics that had defined my rhythm of life for years, and in this liberation, I rediscovered who I really am. But upon returning home, the familiar tension slowly but inevitably began to creep up again. My parents' attempts to contact me have become less frequent, but they have not stopped completely. I began to live, constantly waiting for the next ambush, the next emotional manipulation, the next test of guilt. You need to talk to someone professional, Zita said over brunch on Sunday. With a therapist. It can help you think things through and move forward. At first, I was skeptical about her suggestion. I've always prided myself on being able to handle problems on my own, without outside help. But Zita was persistent, and in the end, I agreed to make an appointment with the therapist she recommended. Dr. Pellegrini was a woman in her 50s with kind, attentive eyes that reflected not only professional concentration but also human concern, and with that calm, almost monastic equanimity in her manner that seemed to create a soft but durable cocoon of security around her. Already at our first session, I felt how slowly, as if pulling on one invisible knot, I was beginning to unravel the tangle of feelings accumulated over the years: resentment, disappointment, endless fatigue, and, to my surprise, I found that I was speaking without hesitation, without internal resistance, as if I had been waiting for someone to listen to me for a long time. It was with such silence, without interruptions, without trying to justify my parents, as many did. I told her not only about that terrible scene with the anniversary and the ill-fated demand for a country house, but also about my whole life, in which, from an early age, the feeling was ingrained that I was always insufficient, that no matter how hard I tried to be comfortable, generous, loyal, I still remained outside true recognition, as if the love and approval of my family were not unconditional, but were given out strictly according to a quota, provided that I meet the financial norm. What you're describing, Dr. Pellegrini said when I finally stopped talking, is a form of financial violence. I looked up in surprise, not quite understanding what she meant. Financial violence? I thought it only happened in marriage. It can happen in any relationship, she explained with the same calmness. Wherever there is a bias in the dynamics of power. In your case, emotional power. The threat to deprive you of love, recognition, and family membership was used as a tool to extract resources from you. They manipulated your kindness. Something inside me clicked into place. It was as if a word that I didn't know, but which described everything I had been through, allowed me to look at the past not with guilt, but with clarity. I wasn't being selfish, refusing help, I was defending myself. I stopped the violence I suffered, even if it was veiled with phrases about love and duty. Over the next few months, therapy became an anchor for me, a space where I finally learned not only to recognize and name what previously seemed to be vague pain, but also to let it go. I learned to see manipulation patterns that I had previously mistaken for family traditions, and I began to understand why I reacted so strongly to family expectations, why I couldn't say no, even when everything inside screamed for the need to do so. But the most important thing was realizing that I didn't have to bear their choices, their consequences, their adult decisions. I was a daughter, not a lifeline. About a year after breaking up with my family, Aunt Beatrice called me again. Her voice sounded calmer, as if she had also rethought a lot this year. "I'd like to give you some news," she said. "Your mom quit her job at the mall, says she can no longer work with her legs all day. And your dad, he finally fixed the old Camry instead of complaining that you didn't buy them a new one. Samuel moved into a smaller apartment, and Alice's husband got a second job delivering food in the evenings." I listened in silence, not knowing how I felt. "They're still complaining about you," she continued, "telling anyone who's willing to listen that you left them. But now I think they're starting to realize how much they depended on you. Mom even admitted to me that maybe asking for a country house was too much." "Maybe," I snorted, not hiding my sarcasm. "It's not an apology," Beatrice admitted, "but it's the closest thing I've heard her say in my entire life." I didn't react immediately. I just left this information inside, like a pebble in my pocket that I can come back to later. At the next session, I discussed this with Dr. Pellegrini. "Do you want to reconnect with them?" "What is it?" she asked, not insisting, but gently touching the wound that was still fresh. I thought about it. "Not yet," I replied. "Maybe not on the same terms as before. If they ever sincerely apologize and respect my boundaries, I might consider limited contact. But I'm not going back to being their ATM anymore." "That sounds like a very healthy position," she nodded. "This is your life. And now it belongs to you." That evening, I was sitting with Alex on the balcony. The sky was in the soft colors of sunset, and the lights of the city slowly lit up below, like stars descending closer. We've been dating for almost 9 months now, and he recently moved some of his stuff into my apartment. Not officially yet, but we both knew we were moving in that direction. "My ad says that my family is struggling to adjust to life without my financial support," I told him, leaning back against the pillow. "How do you feel about this?" I took a sip of wine, thinking about my words. "To be honest," I continued, "they've taken me for granted for so long that they're now facing the consequences of their actions. If someday they really apologize and want to make amends, I do not know. I'm not sure I can trust them again." But I realized something important. I don't have to decide everything now. I can take my time. I can watch how my feelings change over time. Alex smiled and squeezed my hand. "This is GINA, whom I know and love. GINA, who takes care of herself. First love," he added, almost casually, but there was so much tenderness in his voice that the words seemed to hang in the air between us. I looked at him and smiled back, feeling that deep, warm happiness again, which no longer depended on external approval, on family expectations, on anyone's demands. "I love you too," I said softly, looking at the urban landscape, at the light reflected in the windows of the houses. At that moment, I felt at peace. I made difficult decisions, set boundaries, and protected myself from those who were ready to drain me to the bottom. And, most importantly, I have created a space for true love and mutual connection. Yes, my bank account was healthier than before. But the most important thing is that my heart was healthier too.